Hi students, welcome to lesson or module 2, and this lesson is all about getting inside of Pro Tools, learning about its file architecture and some of the basic tools that are available in both the mix and edit windows. So let's get started. In Pro Tools, each song that you're working on has a specific name. They call it a Pro Tools session. So when I refer to a session, I'm referring to a specific song or piece of music. A Pro Tools session consists of a variety of files and folders. So let's look at that file architecture now. Let's go ahead and minimize Pro Tools for right now. And let's go here to my audio hard drive where I've got some projects that I'm working on. You can see I've got a project here called Roadhouse Rock, and each of these is a separate song. First thing you'll notice is that there's a main folder that houses all of the other folders and files. Pro Tools uses a nested file structure. In other words, you have a main session folder, which this is, Roadhouse 1. And then inside that session folder are all of the related files and folders that you need to successfully play back or record this particular session. So let's look individually at each of these components that sit inside of this main Pro Tools session folder. The first file type we want to talk about is the main Pro Tools session file. That's this file right here. It always ends in a .ptx. It's also important to realize that in earlier versions of Pro Tools, they used a different extension. So you'll also see things like a .ptf, which is a main Pro Tools file used by Pro Tools 9 and earlier versions. So in Pro Tools 10, they changed it to a .ptx. Prior to that, it was a .ptf. So here you can see I have 3 separate Pro Tools session files inside of my main session folder. The reason for that is that I'm mixing this project right now, and these are different mixes. So I've put all of these within the same nested Pro Tools session folder. The next file type is the wave cache file. The wave cache file is a file that allows Pro Tools to draw its audio graphically in your Pro Tools session quicker. So all of the audio data, not the actual audio files, but the actual graphical representation of those audio files, all of that information is contained in the wave cache file. So that way it helps Pro Tools to boot up and open much quicker than if it wasn't there. Though the wave cache file helps to improve the performance of Pro Tools when opening a session, it doesn't have any other functionality really. So you could take that wave cache file and delete it, and what's going to happen is next time you open this Pro Tools session, it'll take a little longer to open as it regenerates this wave cache file. So you can get rid of the wave cache file without permanently damaging your Pro Tools session. The audio files folder is exactly what it sounds like. It is a folder in which all of your audio files are kept. So Pro Tools doesn't store all of its audio files inside of its main Pro Tools session file. It stores them in a separate audio files folder. So a lot of times I'll have students working on a project that uses, for example, audio loops or audio waveforms, and they just send me this Pro Tools session file. Well, the problem is this session file refers to the audio files in this audio files folder, and so if you don't send this audio files folder along with your Pro Tools session file, then Pro Tools doesn't know where those audio files went. That's why it's important to understand this nested architecture. If I ask you to send me a Pro Tools session, I want this. I want the main Pro Tools session file because within it, it will contain all of the files and folders that I need to hear what you did on your Pro Tools session. And the audio files folder will house either WAV or AIFF file types based on what you selected when you originated this particular Pro Tools session. I generally use WAV files, so that's why you only see WAV files here inside the audio files folder. In version 9 and earlier versions of Pro Tools, there was a separate fade file folder like you see here. And if you've used a Pro Tools session in a version of Pro Tools earlier than Pro Tools 10, you'll find a fade files folder and fades inside of that folder. Pro Tools 10 includes the fade data inside the .ptx file or the Pro Tools session file. So there may not be any fade files folder in a Pro Tools 10 session. Let's talk about MIDI files as well. As you know, MIDI data can be contained within a MIDI file, and Pro Tools can import and export data as MIDI files. Pro Tools saves that MIDI data inside the Pro Tools session file. MIDI data is saved in the .ptx or Pro Tools session file, and audio data is saved in a separate audio files folder. Reason for that is MIDI data is relatively small in its size and audio data is quite large. So that's probably, other than some other technical reasons, the main reason that they have included MIDI files inside of your Pro Tools session file. You also may find a folder called a clip group folder. If you're using clip groups, there'll be a file folder for those inside of your main Pro Tools session folder. I don't have any of those open right now, or I'm not using any clip groups in this session, so you don't see that particular folder type, a clip groups folder. There also may be a rendered folder if you're doing some rendering, like rendering an elastic audio file or some other file type in Pro Tools. Pro Tools may create a rendered files folder to place those in. Same with video files. If you're using a video file inside your session, there will be a separate video files folder as well as all of the other folders and files that we've talked about. Pro Tools also has a session file backups folder. Inside this folder, you'll find autosave or auto backup Pro Tools session files. You can see all of these are Pro Tools 10, except I have earlier versions that have been automatically saved that are Pro Tools 9.ptf backups. So that's where all of your automatic file backups go. You can actually go to Pro Tools and you can set up your preferences under the Operation tab. You'll see Auto Backup. Enable Session File Auto Backup. Keep the 10 most recent backups, backup every 5 minutes. So that way, if you forget to save, Command S, which none of you should do because all of you have learned that lesson by losing data that you need to be backing up. But if you want a fail-safe way to make sure that your backup files are being backed up, you can set up the autosave, and that is where Pro Tools saves those files, is in your session file backups folder. Next, we're going to look at setting up Pro Tools, how to turn on and off your Pro Tools rig, as well as some of the other elements and components that are used by Pro Tools.